As I mentioned, and as Evangeline knows, these awards and things like this make me a little nervous because it's about the work. More than one occasion I've said, I'm not sure how to handle these awards because it's about the work. Let me give you some perspective. Who am I? My mother is 88 years old and attended the March on Washington. My father, not only was at Selma, but also was at the March on Washington. My father-in-law, who died about 4 years ago, was a Tuskegee Airman. I want to mention that again with a better mind because a better voice, because he's really my hero. My father-in-law was a Tuskegee Airman. My mother-in-law was a part of the team of teachers that prepared the Little Rock Nine. It was a team of teachers that prepared those kids to enter Central High School in 1955. My father-in-law was stationed at Little Rock Air Force Base at the time. And my mother-in-law was a teacher. She was a part of the team of teachers. My wife, I've been married to for 32 years, desegregated a Catholic school in Rapid City, South Dakota. That was my father-in-law's last duty station. And I've desegregated 2 schools in my life. One in Hartsville, South Carolina in 1968, and a private school in, of all places, Greenwich, Connecticut in 1970. Therein lies my perspective. Now I mention this because one thing you'll find in your career as you move along is I don't think you're going to find the perfect job. The perfect job is going to find you. I've had 5 admissions jobs in my life in the 32 years. 1 undergrad, 1 MBA, 3 law school. Each one of those jobs called me. I was in the corporate world, I was doing consulting, I was doing all kinds of things. They called me, and it was the perfect fit. When I was in the corporate world, I was playing a role. But being in admissions and being in enrollment management and being able to not only fill a class, but commit myself to the educational benefits of diversity in the way that I like, thank you very much, University of Michigan. You guys did really well. It allows me to live a life. The corporate world, I play the role, but this allows me to live the life. So, what do? As an admissions officer, I give people a chance to recreate themselves and make themselves better so that they can become more than they seem. That's what I do. That's what we do, the other 80 and 90 schools here. We give people a chance to recreate themselves and make themselves better so they can become more than they seem to be. What do you do? Hopefully, someday when you graduate from law school, you, in your own way, will learn the system, play the system, so that you can someday beat the system and run the system. Because the system is broken. And I mentioned in my personal statement presentation, in our lives we have been guided probably more by faith than by sight. So stay true, stay motivated, persevere. Find the thing that makes you tick, and you'll be okay. Now, why do I do this kind of work? Yeah, there's being committed to the educational benefits of diversity, but I think, as I said, I think the job found me. But with all those people I mentioned before, my father-in-law, my mother-in-law, my wife, my mother, my father, I have a story to tell you. And I hope this is historically accurate. But as I mentioned, I desegregated 2 schools in my life, back in '68, 1970. And there's a story of Roy Wilkins, who was a longtime General Secretary of the NAACP. For those of you who are younger, you've probably never heard of him. I'm sure the majority of the folks who are older have. But Roy Wilkins, who died back in around 1992, 93, was a longtime General Secretary of the NAACP. During the Civil Rights Movement, there were 3 foundations to the fight for civil rights. There's the NCAA, right, well maybe so, Texas, the school that played the NCAA tournament. But there is the NAACP, which was considered the State Department. The NAACP was a very dignified organization, very well respected, and Roy Wilkins, if you ever see or see a video of him, was a very soft-spoken, dignified man. He was a very good representative of the NAACP and its mindset. You then had the National Urban League. And in the Civil Rights Movement, the National Urban League was considered the War Department. They weren't as tactful, but they were very good at planning because they were right there in the urban centers where a lot of difficulties were occurring, a lot of bad things were occurring, and change needed to be happening right away. That was the National Urban League. And then you had CORE, the Congress on Racial Equality. They were headed up by a man by the name of Roy Innis, and that was the Marine Corps. Now, a little sideline here. If you want to know who Roy Innis was, look for the video of when Geraldo Rivera had that talk show. Geraldo Rivera had a talk show on, went national, was syndicated, and he had civil rights leader Roy Innis, and on the other side of the room were these white supremacists, the Nazi Party, the Ku Klux Klan, all these people. Someone said something to Roy Innis. The next thing you know, Roy Innis had his hands around the neck of one of these Nazi people, white supremacist people. Chairs were flying all over the place. There were people trying to beat up on Roy Innis, knocking him with a chair, and he wouldn't budge. He was grimacing, and he just kept doing this, trying to choke the life out of this white supremacist who had said something to him. That was CORE, the Congress on Racial Equality. We're just going to go in and we're going to take care of this situation. They weren't too tactful, but doggone it, every now and then it didn't work. But Roy Wilkins was from the NAACP. Dignified, staid man. He was at a program, and he and Martin Luther King Jr. were having this spirited discussion about the civil rights movement and which was more effective, speeches or the lawyers. And they were going back and forth and back and forth. And Martin Luther King, who was, everyone knows who Martin Luther King is and was an eloquent speaker, was making his case, and Roy Wilkins, because he was a part of the NAACP, they had the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, thought that Thurgood Marshall and his team of lawyers were more important. So they're going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and all of a sudden, Roy, who was older than Martin, but Roy Wilkins put his hand up and said, "Martin, speeches may have desegregated their hearts, but it's a lawyer who desegregated the schools." And one of the few times in Martin Luther King's life when people said they've observed this, and he just sort of calmed down. He just sort of shut it down and sat in his chair and didn't say another word. I do this work because people who want to do what you want to do have given me the chance to give back and to do what I do. So stay true to what you need to do, motivated, focused, and persevere, and you'll be okay. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.